Hello and welcome back for another story with Miss Mo, and welcome to my new studio. I just had it built. Actually, it's not a studio. It's my backyard. And I'll even prove to you that it's real. See, look, I have a pine cone. Look at that. That's not a Zoom background. That's actually a stack of wood. And I thought it was just the perfect place for me to tell you a new story. But first, we have to wake up the story. Laugh and clap. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go with Miss Mo. Two more. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go with Miss Mo. Last time. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go with Miss Mo. Once upon a time, there was a little old man who had magic in his fingers. Children would come from all over with fistfuls of dried flowers and dead weeds, and they'd thrust them in the little man's face. And then the children would walk away with songs in their ears and handfuls of roses and daisies. Well, the mothers and the fathers of these children loved the little old man as well, until they realized that this was not just an illusion or a sleight of hand. He was actually working magic, and that terrified them. And so the women began hiding their children behind their large skirts, and the men simply pushed the old man out of the way, and all of the children were commanded to never seek out the little old man in the woods again. But there was one little boy with big brown eyes and bouncing blonde curls who defied his father and ran off into the woods and found the little old man, gave him his weeds, and loved the songs. But one day the little boy wasn't fast enough. His father discovered his absence and hunted him down and found him in the woods with the little old man. He picked up his son, making his son drop all of his new flowers. He put his son on the saddle of their horse, and then he knocked the old man to the ground, and he stood on his neck. The man bellowed, "Never come near my son again." And then he spit in the old man's face. And the father got on the saddle behind his little boy who was crying, and they rode home to the castle. Now, you can't be too harsh on this man. Sometimes mothers and fathers make mistakes when they're just trying to protect their children. And as a father, he made some good decisions and some bad decisions. And as a king, he made some good decisions, but he made a lot of bad decisions. And those bad decisions meant that when he died and that young boy was a young king, all he had was a very nice crown and a castle with no gold. He had ideas. Oh, he had so many ideas. But the advisors, who had been with the kingdom for a long time, had ideas of their own. And they came to the young king and said, No, your ideas won't work. All that you can do is marry well, and luckily you're very handsome. And we have found a princess who is very rich and happy to become your wife. The wedding is in 3 weeks. This is the only way you can save your kingdom. Well, the young king wanted to save his kingdom and his people, so he agreed. He spent the 3 weeks before the wedding putting himself in disguise and touring the kingdom and visiting the villages and the pubs and chatting with the people because he loved them. Well, one night as he was coming home, he saw a pub and light and laughter was streaming out the windows. And so he went and he snuck in the back of the pub. And there was a man telling a story. And he told a story about catching a fish that was over 6 feet long. Yeah. The king looked around. Wow. I didn't even know we had fish that big in this kingdom. Then another man stood up and said, "Oh, a fish 6 feet long? I went hunting yesterday, and I brought down a stag whose antlers were made of gold." "Whoa," said the king. "Antlers of gold? How did I not know we had that in our kingdom?" Then another man stood up and he said, "Big fish. Golden antlers. Oh, I have a daughter who can take a pile of straw and spin it into gold." The king's jaw dropped. Gold from straw? This is it. This is how I will save my kingdom. And he snuck out the door and started running towards the castle, which was unfortunate because he missed the prize ceremony, where that last man, the miller, received a lovely pouch of golden coins to celebrate the best lie of the night. Well, the king went home, and he woke up the advisors, and he said, "Get up, get up. There is a young woman in our kingdom right now who can spin straw into gold. This is how we'll save the kingdom. You have to find her first thing tomorrow morning." The advisors thought perhaps the king had lost his mind, but when the king tells you to find a young girl that can spin straw into gold, you find a young girl that can spin straw into gold. And so, first thing in the morning, they were up and at it. And it didn't take long to find her. Everyone had heard the story and thought the advisors were joking. They brought the young girl to the castle, they brought her to a room, and they pointed towards a pile of straw. And they said, "You must spin that straw into gold." And the young woman laughed at them. "I can't spin straw into gold. Nobody can spin straw into gold." And she thought it was a joke, but they were not joking. They said, "You will spin the straw into gold, or tonight will be your last night alive." And ignoring her cries and her protests, they slammed the door and locked her in. The next morning, the advisors came, and in the room they found the girl fast asleep and a pile of gleaming pure gold. The girl woke up, she looked at the gold, she looked at them. "Can I go home?" Not yet." And they showed her to another room that had a bigger pile of straw. She looked at them with sadness in her eyes, and they said, "You will spin this straw into gold, or not only will it be your last night alive, it will also be the last night of your father." And she cried and wailed even louder, but they ignored her, closed the door, and locked her in. They found the king later on that night, and the king asked them if they had found the young woman, and they shook their heads sadly. "No, not yet, but we will, we will." The next morning the advisors returned, and there was the girl asleep on the floor, and there was the huge pile of gold. The girl woke up and looked at them. "Please, now can I go home?" They smiled. Not yet. And they took her to another room with an even bigger pile of straw. You know where this is going. And they told her, "That straw needs to become gold, or this will be your last night, your father's last night, and all of your friends' last night." Well, she howled and she cried and she clawed, and they pulled her off of them and locked her in. But she wailed and pounded and scratched on the door, screaming and moaning and crying with such sadness that it reached the king's ears up in his chamber. And he wondered who was making these terrible noises. And so he wandered through the castle, following the sound until he got to her door. He ordered the guard to open it. He opened the door, and there he found this weeping, broken young woman. He asked her what was wrong, and she told him everything. She told him about the liar's contest. She told him about the advisors bringing her into the castle, and the straw and the gold, and her father's life being threatened. And she wept, and she looked at the king, and she said, "I can't do it. I don't know. I can't do it." The king dropped to his knees before the young woman and said, "I'm so sorry. I knew nothing. Of course, you are free to go." The young woman for a moment forgot that he was a king, and she ran over and hugged him. And when she did, he felt a magic that he had not felt for a long time. He looked at her and he said, "You are free to go. But somehow you have done this twice. And if you could do it just one more time, then we could both be free. But it's up to you." And he left, but he did not lock the door. And he did not go to bed. He went and found the advisors. He woke them up, and he said, we are no longer in need of your services in this kingdom. And if you wish your head to remain where God put it, then I advise you to pack quickly and leave immediately." The advisors liked where their heads were, and so they followed the king's commands, and they were gone in minutes. In the morning, the king walked towards the room where the girl had been, and he didn't know what he would find there. He didn't know if he would find gold. He didn't know if he would find her, but he really hoped that he would find her. And he did. There she was, asleep on the floor, and there was an enormous pile of gold. The king gave the young woman a generous portion of the gold, thanked her for her service to the kingdom, and sent her on her way. Then he took all of the gold that had been spun in the last 3 days, and he began to build his kingdom. He invested in farms and schools. He invested in the land and the people, and the kingdom began to flourish once again. And the king was happy, not just because the kingdom was doing well, but because many nights he could be found on long walks with a young girl, with a young woman who could not spin straw into gold, but had certainly captured his heart. Less than a year after they met, he asked her if she would become his queen. And the wedding was an enormous celebration. The people were so happy to have such a couple leading their kingdom. And just a few months after they were married, the queen informed the king that she was going to have a baby. The king was delighted, but he was confused as to how his wife could be so happy and so sad at the same time. But he took excellent care of her. He ordered the best cooks and the best food and the best midwives and the best doctors and the best herbs. And she was pampered and healthy and fairly happy. And the day came when she delivered a beautiful, healthy baby boy. And the king wept with joy, and the queen wept as well, but he wasn't sure if her tears were sadness or joy, because she seemed to be feeling both at the same time, and he didn't know why. Well, when the baby was only a day old, the queen's mood took a turn, and she told the king that he would have to stay away from her and sleep in his own chamber on the other side of the castle for the next 3 nights, no questions asked. Well, the king loved his wife and wanted to make her happy, and so he agreed. Well, he agreed for 2 nights. But on the 3rd night, he had had enough, and he had to know what was causing so much turmoil in his wife. And so he began to march towards her chamber, determined to get some answers. Well, on his way, he met her maidservant, and he grabbed her by the wrist, and he pointed in her face, and he said, "I am your king, and I command you to tell me what is going on with the queen." She smiled. And she said, "I'll tell you, but not because you're my king, but because I am loyal to my queen." And so the servant told the king the tale. She said that first night when your queen was locked in the room with the straw, she didn't know what to do and her life was in danger. And she cried and she cried and she wept until suddenly there was a little old man who appeared out of nowhere and told her that he could spin the straw into gold for a price. And so she gave him her mother's ring. And then he began to whir and spin, and she fell asleep. In the morning there was gold. And she was happy, so she thought she could go, but then they locked her in again. And she cried and she wailed, and she didn't know if the man would return, but he did. And he asked for another prize to spin the straw into gold, and she gave him her grandmother's necklace. That's all she had. And so he began to whir and to sing and to spin, and she fell asleep. And in the morning there was the gold. And she thought now she could go home. But she couldn't. They put her in another room, and they threatened her life and her father's life and everyone's life that she loved. And then you came in, and you said she could go, but you asked her to do it one more time, but she didn't know if she could. And then the old man came back, but she had nothing left to give him. The king's heart began to beat very fast, and his stomach turned very cold. What did she give him? he asked. And the maid began to cry. You have to understand, she'd been away from her family for 3 days. She was tired, she was hungry, she was cold, she was so afraid, and you had been so kind, and she wanted so dearly to help you. You cannot judge her. What did she give him? And the maid shrugged and said, she promised him her first child. Your first child. And the king understood now how the queen had been happy and sad at the same time. The maid continued, and now he's back. He came back 2 nights ago, and he demanded the baby, and the queen begged him with such sadness that his heart was softened, and he said, fine, if you can guess my name, then you can keep the baby. And so he gave her 3 nights. And the last 2 nights we have searched all of the kingdom. We have asked everyone for every name. We have sent people into the woods to hide, to hunt. We don't know. We've guessed every name we know, and now he's back. He's here, and she doesn't know, and he's going to take the baby. The maid looked at the king in fear, but she did not see fear in his eyes. He simply thanked her, and he put his hands on her shoulders and said, do not be afraid. No one will take my son tonight. And he marched towards the queen chamber. As he got close, he could hear the queen crying in the room, and he kicked down the door, and he stormed into the room. No one touches! And then he saw him. A little old man. And suddenly the king was a little boy again, holding a fistful of dried weeds and begging for a song. And suddenly he understood. He walked over to the little old man, who was trembling just a little, and he put his arms on the shoulders of the old man, and he knelt down in front of him, and he said, do you remember me? For I remember you. And you do not need to steal this baby to have a friend. You can stay here and be his friend here and be our friend. For I remember you, and I know your name, Rumpelstiltskin. The old man seemed to just relax under the king's grip. And looking into his eyes, he saw a little boy with big brown eyes and big blonde curls. And he smiled. And he stayed. And everyone in the castle learned his name. And he taught the young little prince songs and turned his weeds into flowers. And he did not spin much more straw into gold, but he spun stories. And when he died, his name was remembered for a very long time. I hope you enjoyed that story. Rumpelstiltskin is a very old story, but I've always had questions about it. And sometimes I like to ask stories questions, and the answers to those questions create a new story. So I encourage you today to ask questions, and of course, to tell the story to anyone who will listen, because stories matter as much as names. Thanks for tuning in today. Tune in for any other stories. Subscribe. I hope to have more stories coming soon, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Miss Mo, Miss Mo, Miss Mo has got to go. 2 more, Miss Mo, Miss Mo, Miss Mo has got to go. Last time, Miss Mo, Miss Mo, Miss Mo has got to go. Bye. Have a great day.